Most XRP holders aren't paying attention to what's happening behind closed doors right now. Because if reports surrounding Ripple's latest high-level discussions are even partially accurate, they could reveal a much bigger picture than most investors realize. We're talking about carbon credits, global settlement infrastructure, and a market that some analysts believe could eventually move trillions of dollars in value. And here's what makes this interesting. While most of the crypto market is focused on price action, a growing number of institutions are focusing on something completely different: how real-world assets will be tracked, tokenized, and settled in the future. Now, recent reports have sparked speculation that Ripple may be involved in conversations connected to the next phase of global carbon credit markets. If true, this wouldn't just be another partnership announcement. It could represent a much larger shift toward using blockchain infrastructure for real-world economic activity. And that's where XRP enters the conversation. Because for years, Ripple has positioned the XRP Ledger as a fast, low-cost, and energy-efficient settlement network. The same qualities that made it attractive for payments could also make it attractive for entirely new asset classes. So the question isn't whether carbon markets are growing. The question is whether blockchain networks like the XRP Ledger could eventually become part of the infrastructure supporting them. And if that happens, the implications could be far bigger than most investors are currently pricing in. You're watching XRP Update. Today we're breaking down the reports, the institutional angle, and why some XRP supporters believe developments like these could have major implications for the future of XRP. Let's start with what has everyone talking. According to reports circulating within the digital asset space, Ripple representatives were allegedly involved in discussions connected to G7 policy initiatives focused on sustainability, carbon markets, and future financial infrastructure. Now, it's important to separate confirmed facts from speculation. What we do know is that governments around the world continue exploring ways to modernize financial systems while also pursuing ambitious environmental goals. One area receiving increasing attention is the global carbon credit market. For those unfamiliar, carbon credits are designed to help organizations offset emissions by purchasing credits tied to environmental projects and sustainability initiatives. The challenge is that today's carbon markets remain fragmented. Different registries operate in different jurisdictions. Settlement systems vary. Tracking ownership can be complex, and cross-border transactions often introduce additional layers of inefficiency. That's why many analysts believe blockchain technology could eventually play a major role in this sector. Because blockchain offers transparency, traceability, and the ability to move assets across borders more efficiently than many traditional systems. And when people begin discussing blockchain solutions for global settlement, Ripple and the XRP Ledger naturally enter the conversation. For years, Ripple has focused on solving cross-border transaction challenges: speed, cost, interoperability, liquidity. These have always been central themes behind Ripple's vision. Now imagine applying those same principles to a market involving participants from multiple countries, regulatory frameworks, and financial institutions. Suddenly, the conversation becomes much bigger than simple payments. It becomes a discussion about infrastructure, and that's where many XRP supporters see a potential opportunity. Because if carbon credits eventually become tokenized, those assets will need systems capable of supporting issuance, transfers, settlement, and liquidity. Some analysts believe blockchain networks could provide exactly that foundation. And among the networks often mentioned in institutional discussions, the XRP Ledger continues to stand out because of its transaction speed and energy efficiency. That energy efficiency point is particularly important. Environmental initiatives naturally attract scrutiny regarding sustainability. Unlike proof-of-work systems that consume significant energy, the XRP Ledger was specifically designed to operate with minimal environmental impact. As governments and institutions pursue climate-related initiatives, that characteristic becomes increasingly relevant. Now, does this mean XRP has officially been selected as a global carbon settlement asset? No, there is no confirmation of that. And it's important not to jump ahead of the facts. But what investors are paying attention to is the broader direction of travel, because the conversation itself reveals something important. Major institutions are no longer asking whether blockchain technology has a future. They're increasingly discussing how blockchain technology fits into future financial systems. And that's a very different conversation. For years, crypto was viewed primarily through the lens of speculation. Today, discussions are increasingly centered around tokenization, digital infrastructure, settlement layers, and real-world asset integration. Carbon credits happen to be one example, but they're far from the only example. We're seeing similar conversations around real estate, treasuries, commodities, private credit, and other forms of tokenized assets. Many experts believe we're still in the early stages of that transition, and if they're right, the networks facilitating those assets could become increasingly important over time. Which brings us back to Ripple, because Ripple's strategy has never been limited to one specific industry. The broader vision has always centered around enabling value to move more efficiently across different markets and jurisdictions. Whether that's payments, tokenized assets, stablecoins, or potentially carbon markets, the underlying theme remains the same: liquidity, settlement, interoperability. And that's why these reports are generating so much discussion throughout the XRP community. Not because a single meeting changes everything overnight, but because it may provide another glimpse into how institutions are thinking about the future of financial infrastructure. And when multiple trends begin moving in the same direction, tokenization, regulatory clarity, institutional adoption, and sustainable finance, many investors start paying closer attention. Because sometimes the biggest opportunities emerge long before the broader market fully understands what's developing. And if blockchain eventually becomes a foundational layer for global asset settlement, the networks involved could look very different from how most people value them today. But here's the part many investors are paying attention to. If carbon markets continue expanding the way many analysts expect, the biggest challenge won't be creating carbon credits. The challenge will be moving value efficiently between different countries, registries, institutions, and financial systems. And that's where XRP supporters believe the XRP Ledger could have an advantage. Because the entire purpose of the XRP Ledger was to help move value quickly, cheaply, and across borders without the friction that exists in traditional systems. Now, to be clear, none of this guarantees XRP adoption within carbon markets. But what it does show is that the types of problems carbon markets face today are the exact types of problems blockchain technology was designed to solve. And that's why discussions like these continue attracting attention from institutions. At the same time, regulatory clarity is moving closer. Around the world, governments are working on frameworks that could make it easier for institutions to participate in digital asset markets. And many investors believe that as regulations become clearer, we'll start seeing more real-world assets move on to blockchain infrastructure. Carbon credits could be one piece of that puzzle. Real estate could be another. Tokenized securities, commodities, and other financial assets may follow as well. That's why some XRP holders aren't just watching price charts anymore. They're watching the infrastructure being built behind the scenes. Because if blockchain adoption expands beyond speculation and into large-scale utility, the networks supporting that activity could become increasingly important. And that's really the bigger story here. Not whether one meeting happened, not whether one report turns out to be accurate, but the fact that conversations around tokenization, sustainability, institutional adoption, and blockchain infrastructure are becoming more common at the highest levels. And if those trends continue moving in the same direction, many believe the next chapter for digital assets could look very different from anything we've seen before. For now, investors will be watching closely for new developments, new partnerships, and any signs that real-world asset adoption is accelerating. Because if blockchain eventually becomes part of the infrastructure powering global markets, the projects positioned at the center of that transition could benefit the most. And that's why XRP supporters continue paying attention to stories like this. Not because of what might happen tomorrow, but because of what could be taking shape over the coming years. We'll continue following the developments and bringing you the latest updates as this story evolves. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next XRP update.